Up until the 1860s, travelling by rail was quite an ordeal, even for those with a bit of brass. This coach was made in 1846 for the Stockton-Darlington Railway. Now, it's cramped, it's desperately uncomfortable, and it must have been bitterly cold in the winter. There's no heating whatsoever, and it would have been impossible to read anything by the dim light from the oil lamp in the roof. Worst of all, there were no lavatories. They say the stampede for the loos at every station was like witnessing the charge of the Light Brigade. By the 1870s, life was becoming positively luxurious for the travelling public. In 1873, lavatories had appeared for the very first time, and in the same year, sleeping cars were introduced. By 1879, you could eat a meal on a train, and by 1881, you could see what was on your plate because they'd introduced electric lights. And by the 1890s, the public were being positively pampered with steam heating. By this time, travelling by train had received the royal stamp of approval. By the 1880s, a luxurious palace on wheels for the Queen, and for the rest, comfort undreamt of just a few years earlier. So, David, why did the companies suddenly improve comfort on the trains?
Well, one of the main reasons with this particular carriage that we're in now, which dates from 1898, was that you had two routes from London to Scotland. This was on the East Coast route, next to where the museum is here, but it was in direct competition with the West Coast route, which was run by different railway companies. There were races, in fact, for each the East Coast and the West Coast people to prove which was the fastest service. In actual fact, at the time, the West Coast route won, but the East Coast route, for which this carriage was built, made more of a virtue of being more comfortable and more scenic, which it is, of course. And so this is the result. And in fact, this design of carriage didn't really alter very much for the following 60 years.
As the century turned, these were the golden years for the railways. Motor cars were still unreliable bone shakers and as yet no real threat. There was no community in Britain which was more than 20 miles from a railway station. If commerce was Britain's lifeblood, then the railways were its veins and arteries. The railways played a vital role transporting troops and weapons to the front between 1914 and 1918 as Europe went to war yet again. 1923 saw the railways amalgamated into four great companies. Even today, their initials are still synonymous with the great and good old days. You worked as a clerk from 1945, the end of the war, all around this area.
Yes, I did. I enjoyed it too. I worked on most of the branch lines because from Middlesbrough the area was very vast. So I worked from Whitby to Hawes and up into Durham and down almost into York. So it was a big area with a lot of branch lines.
I mean, really, I suppose you saw the very last golden days of the branch lines. What was life like?
Well, when you worked at a station, and perhaps you weren't there all the time, when you were on relief, you obviously were not there all the time, but people were part of the community. They were respected. A clerk was respected. The station master seemed to come along in the same category as the school teacher and maybe the doctor. But I enjoyed it because I was made to feel part of a very large business, which was profitable in those days.
Of course, you were a woman in a man's world as well, because weren't you just after the war?
Yes, indeed. The men were not yet back from the forces, and when they came back, they felt very strange in this, what to them would be an even more restricted atmosphere in the army. But I enjoyed it. I was well looked after. We issued day tickets for people to go on holiday. We issued week tickets for people to go on holiday. And when they came back, they often used to bring me a rock kipper and little presents. And sweets were still on ration then. And the early morning workman would often bring me a sweetie in the morning at 5 o'clock to keep me sweet for the rest of the shift, they used to say.
Of course, we mustn't forget there weren't too many cars around in those days. I mean, life really revolved around the train and the bike.
Yes, my bike used to go with me. I used to climb on the early morning train from Ormsby, which went at 4:23, and me and my bike used to go to Middlesbrough, where there were a lot of people about at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I used to take my bike along as far as Richmond, because when I came back, there often wasn't a train to get me home, so I used to cycle from Middlesbrough, but I was never afraid.
Of course, the branch lines and the stations were very much a part of local rural life then.
Very much so, because after all, the station master was the coalman, and so everything came to the railway. The stock came to the railway, the day-old chicks came to the railway, and you dealt with them, incoming and outgoing, breeding stock, all sorts of interesting things. And pigeons, of course, lots and lots of pigeons to be released at that particular moment. Not a moment before or a moment after.
Now, Stokesley was one of the stations you worked on as well.
Absolutely. There was a hatchery there, so we had a lot of day-old chicks. Well, they weren't so bad, but the growing stock were awfully smelly. Awfully smelly. Not to mention the fish. That was awfully smelly too and very wet. But Stokesley station was very interesting. I mean, you could get your hair cut in the signal box if you wanted. You know, if you weren't too particular, you get a short back sides for 4pence. That was often the case. Signalmen seemed to be very good at cutting hair.
I wonder why that was.
Perhaps they got time between trains.
Britain's railway network was at its greatest in 1930, when there were nearly 20,500 miles of line, the bulk of which were branch lines. One of those was the Wensleydale Railway through Leyburn, used until recently to transport stone. In its day, it was at the heart of everyday life in Leyburn. So here we are, Arthur. That house behind. You were born there?
Yes, I was born in that house, March 11th, 1940. As I say, I was born there. I knew nothing else but trains when I was little. And there were some steps at the front of the house and a gate at the top. And you just stand on that gate all day and watch trains.
What was life like in those days?
It was very casual. It was casual, but everything ran smooth. Trains ran on time, and everything was carried. People were happy with it.
What sort of things were the trains carrying though? Because I mean, there weren't many cars around those days.
Very few cars in them days. Livestock-wise, they carried everything from day-old chickens to elephants.
Elephants?
Yes, elephants. There was once a circus came to Leyburn. The elephants were bought by train, brought in vans, the doors at the ends, took them out and then walked them up through town to the circus. Because that was before my days.
Right. But
Yeah.
I mean, that didn't happen every day either,
No,
did it?
no, that didn't happen every day, no.
So most days, what kind of freight were they carrying?
Well, sheep, cattle, horses from stables, and a lot of timber, an awful lot of timber went away from here. Stone from quarries, scrap, cattle food, everything in general.
I was going to say, what did the railway in those days mean to Leyburn and its people?
Well, it was a lifeline because shops relied on all their parcels and that came on passenger train, and they were taken up here, checked off in office, put into a wagon and delivered around town.
Do you miss those days?
Yes, oh yeah, it'd be nice for them to come back again.
Do you think
Yeah.
they ever will?
Not to the extent that they were then. It'd be nice if they did, but not to that extent, I don't think.
Because looking at this station now, it doesn't look much like a station, shall we
It
say, that's
doesn't.
being kind. But in fact, it was one of the best kept stations in Yorkshire, wasn't it, or in North Yorkshire?
Yes, it was. You couldn't find a weed on this track anywhere. Right. And up there was a prize-winning garden up there.
Well, let's go and have a look at it, what's left of it anyway. So how busy a station was it when you were a lad?
Well, it was busy because it employed 39 altogether, from station master right down to plate layers. Somebody used to get up early morning to come and light engines up, a lighter up, and you know, that's how they started their career, to go onto locos and that.
So there were engines actually stationed
There
here
was
at
two.
least?
There was one to work passengers and a shunting engine stationed here. There was 3 drivers, 2 firemen and somebody to light up on a morning.
So economically it was really quite the heart of Leyburn.
Yes, it was. Yeah, yeah.
Well now, there we are, Arthur. That's what's
Yeah.
left of the prize-winning
The
garden.
prize-winning garden, yeah. It was a step up, a long lawn, and they once went down to the river at Leyburn and got nice big round stones and wrote Leyburn in stones on the sloping lawn there. And further along towards the bridge, it was all rockery gardens. And like I said, they used to win first prizes with it. And also, it didn't include just the garden, it was the whole tidy station that they got the prizes for.
Do you feel a bit sad looking at it now?
Well, it's a sad sight now to what it was then. Yes, it is. Yeah.
It must have seemed that the railways had reached their point of perfection and were beyond improvement, but it was not to be. Europe had gone to war again, and once more the railways rose to the occasion. But during those war years of 1939 to 45, they were badly neglected and starved of investment, and it meant that when peace was eventually restored, something drastic had to be done. In 1948, the Labour government nationalised the network, but there was something else, fast catching up, that was to wreak untold damage on the network. The internal combustion engine had arrived with a vengeance.